Welcome to a tale you think you know, but served with a twist. Picture the legend of Robin Hood, but instead of stealing from the rich to give to the poor, our hero steals the best recipes from fancy restaurants to feed hungry customers. Instead of Sherwood Forest, we have Sherwood's kitchen. Instead of arrows, we have spatulas. And instead of the sheriff's men, we have health inspectors. Pull up a chair, grab a napkin, and prepare for a story that's both familiar and completely different. Before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content. It means a lot. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what your favorite fantasy tale is. It's always so interesting to see how regions influence what we love. Now, grab a cup of tea and your favorite blanket. Get cozy, and let's begin. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tile floor of Sherwood's kitchen, a small restaurant tucked between a dry cleaner and a shop that sold nothing but buttons. The place had seen better days, much like its owner, Robin Hood. Robin wasn't his real name, of course. His mother had named him Robert, but everyone called him Robin because he had a habit of taking leftover food from the fancy restaurants downtown and bringing it back to feed his own customers. The restaurant itself told a story of dreams and determination. Robin had bought it 3 years ago with money he'd saved from working double shifts at other people's kitchens. The previous owner had run it into the ground, serving coffee that tasted like mud and sandwiches that could double as doorstops. Robin had spent 6 months scrubbing grease off walls, replacing broken equipment, and learning that running a restaurant was harder than working in one. The neighborhood wasn't the fanciest part of town, but it had character. Working families lived in the apartments above the shops, elderly folks sat on stoops watching the world go by, and kids walked to school past Robin's windows every morning. These were the people Robin wanted to serve, the ones who deserved good food but couldn't afford to eat at the places downtown where a single appetizer cost more than a full meal at Sherwood's kitchen. Robin stood behind the counter, wiping down surfaces that were already clean. It was a nervous habit he'd picked up during his first year of running the restaurant. The health inspector had given him nightmares about germs, and now he cleaned everything twice. Sometimes 3 times, if business was slow. The bell above the door chimed, and in walked Little John, who was neither little nor named John. He was actually quite tall and his name was Jonathan, but nicknames had a way of sticking in this neighborhood. Little John worked as Robin's cook, and he had arms like tree trunks and a beard that looked like it could house a family of birds. Little John announced that the morning delivery truck had broken down again, which meant they were short on ingredients. The truck was older than some of the customers, held together with duct tape and prayer. Robin had been meaning to find a new supplier, but the current one gave him credit when money was tight, and loyalty like that was worth more than reliability. Robin sighed and suggested they might need to take a trip to the market district, where the high-end restaurants threw away more food in a day than Sherwood's kitchen served in a week. He discovered this wasteful practice by accident 6 months ago, when he'd gotten lost looking for a wholesale supplier and ended up behind a row of expensive restaurants during their evening cleanup. The sight had made him angry at first. Perfectly good vegetables tossed because they had tiny blemishes, bread thrown away because it was a day old, meat discarded because the restaurant had ordered too much. Meanwhile, his customers were asking for smaller portions because they couldn't afford full meals. The waste was criminal, but it was also an opportunity. This wasn't stealing, Robin told himself. It was recycling. The fancy places had more than they needed, and his customers were still hungry. Besides, most of that food was still perfectly good. The rich folks just didn't like day-old bread or vegetables that had a tiny brown spot. Will Scarlet burst through the kitchen doors, his apron stained with what looked like tomato sauce but could have been anything. Will was the youngest member of their crew, barely 20, with red hair that matched his last name and an energy level that made Robin tired just watching him. Will worked as their server, and he had a gift for making customers smile even when their orders were wrong. Will had started working at the restaurant as a part-time job while going to college, but he dropped out after his first semester to work full-time. His parents hadn't been thrilled about the career change, but Will loved the restaurant business. He enjoyed the fast pace, the constant interaction with people, and the satisfaction of feeding folks who left happy and full. The young man had a natural talent for reading customers. He knew which ones wanted to chat and which ones preferred to be left alone with their food. He could spot a bad tipper from across the room and still treat them with the same cheerful service he gave everyone else. Most importantly, he understood that working in a restaurant meant being part of something bigger than yourself. Will reported that Table 6 was complaining about their eggs again. They wanted them cooked exactly 4 minutes, not 3, not 5, and definitely not the 6 minutes they'd been given. Robin suggested Will tell the customers that their eggs were prepared with extra care, which was restaurant code for "we're not making them again." The morning rush began like it always did, with a trickle of customers who turned into a stream, then a river, then a flood. Robin moved between the kitchen and the front counter, taking orders and making sure the coffee stayed hot. The coffee was actually pretty good, which surprised most people. Robin had learned to make it from an old Italian man who ran a cafe 3 blocks away. The man had taught him that good coffee was about patience and respect for the beans, not about fancy machines or expensive equipment. Friar Tuck arrived for his lunch shift, though he wasn't actually a friar. He was a retired theology professor who'd started working part-time to pay for his grandson's college. Tuck had a round belly that strained against his apron and a laugh that could fill the whole restaurant. He worked the morning prep shift, cutting vegetables and making soups that tasted like they'd been simmering for hours even though he'd only started them that morning. Tuck brought more than just cooking skills to the restaurant. He had a way of making everyone feel welcome, from the businessman grabbing a quick lunch to the elderly woman who came in every day for coffee and conversation. He remembered customers' names, asked about their families, and somehow managed to make each person feel like they were his favorite. The former professor had stories for every occasion, jokes that actually made people laugh, and a wisdom that came from years of teaching young people. He'd worked in university kitchens during graduate school, which explained his ability to feed large groups of people with limited resources. More importantly, he understood that food was about more than nutrition. It was about community, comfort, and care. Tuck mentioned that he'd seen Sheriff Norton's car parked outside the Golden Spoon, the fancy restaurant 2 miles away. The sheriff wasn't actually a sheriff either. He was the city's head food inspector, and he had it in for small restaurants like Sherwood's Kitchen. Norton believed that only the expensive places deserved to stay open, and he'd been looking for reasons to shut Robin down for months. The lunch crowd was different from the breakfast people. They were hungrier, more impatient, and usually in a hurry to get back to work. Robin had learned to read customers' faces. The ones who looked at their phones while ordering wanted simple food delivered quickly. The ones who studied the menu for 5 minutes wanted to feel like they were getting something special, even if it was just a sandwich. Maid Marian walked in during the lunch rush, as she did every Tuesday and Thursday. She worked at the bank across the street and always ordered the same thing, a turkey sandwich with no mayo, extra pickles, and a side of chips. But Robin suspected she came in for more than just the food. She had a way of looking at him that made him forget how to count change. Marian was different from most of the customers. She asked about the restaurant's business, offered suggestions for improving efficiency, and sometimes stayed after her lunch break to help with small tasks. She understood numbers and budgets in a way that impressed Robin, who'd learned restaurant math through trial and error. The banker had grown up in the neighborhood, back when it was rougher than it was now. She'd worked her way through college, earned a business degree, and returned to help local businesses succeed. She believed that strong communities were built on strong local businesses, and she'd taken a personal interest in Sherwood's kitchen's success. Robin appreciated her advice, even if he sometimes felt like she was too good for a guy who spent his days flipping burgers and washing dishes. Marion mentioned that she'd heard rumors about the Golden Spoon's head chef leaving town suddenly. Word was that he'd been caught selling restaurant secrets to competitors, though nobody could prove it. Robin found this interesting, since the Golden Spoon was known for having the best recipes in the city. If their head chef was gone, maybe their kitchen wasn't as secure as everyone thought. The afternoon brought a different kind of challenge. The delivery truck finally arrived, but half the vegetables were wilted and the meat looked like it had seen better days. Robin examined each item with care, separating the good from the questionable. Waste was expensive, but serving bad food was worse. He'd learned that lesson early in his restaurant career. Little John suggested they take a field trip to the market district after closing. The fancy restaurants there threw away enough good food to feed half the neighborhood, and Robin had connections with some of the delivery drivers who were happy to look the other way. It wasn't exactly legal, but it wasn't exactly illegal either. The food was going to be thrown away anyway. We'll clean tables while sharing gossip he'd picked up from customers. Apparently, the mayor was planning to redevelop the whole neighborhood, which would mean higher rent for everyone. Small businesses like Sherwood's Kitchen might not survive the changes. Robin tried not to think about it too much. He'd deal with that problem when it arrived. The evening shift brought its own rhythm. Dinner customers were more relaxed than lunch people, but they also expected better service. Robin had learned to adjust his approach based on the time of day. Evening customers wanted to feel like they were somewhere special, even if they were just eating meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Friar Tuck shared a story about his grandson's college expenses while he cleaned the kitchen. The boy was studying to be a teacher, which was noble work but didn't pay well. Tuck worried about the student loans piling up, but he was proud of his grandson for choosing a career that helped people. Robin understood that feeling. Running a restaurant wasn't about getting rich. It was about feeding people and creating a place where they felt welcome. As closing time approached, Robin counted the day's receipts. They'd made enough to cover expenses, with a little left over. Not enough to save for the future, but enough to keep the lights on for another day. In the restaurant business, that counted as success. Little John loaded up his truck with empty containers and headed toward the market district. Robin rode shotgun, while Will and Tuck followed in the restaurant's van. The plan was simple: visit the dumpsters behind the fancy restaurants and collect anything that was still good. It sounded worse than it was. Most of the food was perfectly fine, just thrown away because it was approaching its sell-by date. The Golden Spoon sat at the corner of 5th and Main, its windows glowing with warm light. Even from the parking lot, Robin could smell the expensive ingredients they used. The restaurant served tiny portions on enormous plates, charging more for one meal than Robin's customers spent in a week. But he had to admit, the food was good. The building itself was a work of art, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that probably cost more than Robin's monthly rent. Customers dressed up to eat there, making reservations weeks in advance for the privilege of spending a fortune on food that looked prettier than it tasted filling. Robin had eaten there once, on a date that had gone badly wrong. The portions were so small he'd stopped at a drive-thru on the way home. The service was so formal he'd felt like he was in a museum rather than a restaurant. But the techniques he'd observed that night had stuck with him. The way they plated food, the attention to detail, the precision of every movement in the kitchen. There were lessons to be learned, even from places that seemed to have forgotten that restaurants were supposed to feed people. Will kept watch while Robin and Little John checked the dumpster behind the Golden Spoon. They found containers of fresh vegetables, bread that was only a day old, and enough cheese to feed a small army. The waste was criminal, but it was also an opportunity. Robin's customers would eat well tomorrow. Tuck discovered something interesting in the dumpster behind Tony's, another upscale restaurant. Mixed in with the food waste were dozens of recipe cards, handwritten in careful script. Someone had thrown away what looked like a master chef's personal collection. Robin examined the cards under the streetlight. These weren't just any recipes. They were signed by Henry, the famous chef who trained half the cooks in the city. The recipe cards were like finding treasure. Each one contained detailed instructions for dishes that cost $50 or more in the fancy restaurants. Robin carefully stored them in a plastic bag, already imagining how he could adapt them for his own kitchen. His customers deserved good food, even if they couldn't afford golden spoon prices. Back at Sherwood's kitchen, the crew sorted through their finds. Most of the vegetables were still crisp, the bread was perfect for tomorrow's sandwiches, and the cheese would make amazing omelets. Robin estimated they'd collected enough ingredients to feed customers for 3 days, all food that would have been wasted otherwise. Little John examined the recipe cards with the interest of a scientist studying a new species. He'd been cooking for 20 years, but these recipes contained techniques he'd never seen before. The instructions were detailed and precise, written by someone who understood that cooking was both art and science. Will suggested they try making one of the fancy dishes as a special for tomorrow's lunch. Robin agreed, choosing a recipe for something called countryside chicken with garden herbs. The ingredient list was intimidating, but they had everything they needed thanks to their evening collection trip. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Sheriff Norton arrived with 2 assistants and a clipboard full of forms. He announced that he was conducting a surprise inspection, which wasn't really a surprise since he'd been threatening to do it for weeks. Robin remained calm, knowing that his kitchen was clean and his food was fresh. Norton examined every surface, every container, every ingredient. He was looking for violations, hoping to find something that would justify shutting down Sherwood's kitchen. Robin followed him around, answering questions and providing documentation. Everything was in order, which clearly disappointed the inspector. The inspection lasted 2 hours, during which time customers accumulated outside the locked front door. Robin could see regular customers checking their watches and walking away. Each lost customer represented lost income, which was exactly what Norton wanted. Finally, Norton admitted that he couldn't find any problems. The kitchen was clean, the food was fresh, and all the paperwork was complete. He left with a warning that he'd be back soon, which everyone knew was more promise than threat. Robin unlocked the front door and welcomed the customers who'd waited. Maid Marian was among them, and she commented that the inspection had seemed unusually thorough. She'd watched through the window and noticed that Norton had spent extra time examining the ingredients, as if he was looking for something specific. The lunch rush began with Little John preparing the countryside chicken special. The recipe was more complex than anything they'd attempted before, requiring precise timing and techniques that challenged even John's considerable skills. But the result was spectacular. The chicken was tender and flavorful, the herbs created a perfect balance, and the presentation looked like something from a fancy restaurant. Customers noticed the difference immediately. The special sold out within an hour, and people were asking when it would be available again. Robin realized they'd stumbled onto something important. Good food was good food, regardless of where the recipe came from. Will suggested they try more of the fancy recipes, adapting them for their simpler kitchen and budget-conscious customers. Robin agreed, seeing an opportunity to offer something special without raising prices. If they could make restaurant-quality food accessible to regular people, they'd found their niche. The afternoon brought unexpected drama. Henry himself walked through the front door, looking around with the sharp eyes of a professional chef. He was smaller than Robin had expected, with silver hair and hands that moved like a pianist's. Henry had trained in France and worked in kitchens around the world before settling in the city. Henry explained that he'd heard about their special and wanted to try it. Robin's heart pounded as he realized the famous chef was about to taste food made from his own recipe. If recognized it, Robin could be in serious trouble. Little John prepared the countryside chicken with extra care, knowing that this customer would notice every detail. The kitchen fell silent as Henry tasted the dish, his expression giving nothing away. Finally, he smiled and complimented the preparation, saying it reminded him of a recipe he'd developed years ago. Robin held his breath, waiting for the accusation. Instead, Henry asked about the chef's training and background. Little John explained that he'd learned by doing, working in small kitchens and experimenting with ingredients. Henry nodded approvingly, saying that the best cooks learned from experience rather than textbooks. The conversation continued for another hour, with Henry sharing stories about his career and Little John asking questions about technique. Robin gradually relaxed, realizing that the famous chef was more interested in good food than in who'd created the recipe. As Henry prepared to leave, he mentioned that he'd recently left his position at the Golden Spoon due to creative differences with the management. He'd been looking for a new challenge, something that would let him cook for people who truly appreciated good food. Robin felt an opportunity approaching. That evening, after closing, Robin approached Henry with a proposition. Would he be interested in consulting for Sherwood's Kitchen? Not as a full-time employee, but as someone who could help them improve their menu and techniques. The pay wouldn't be much, but the work would be meaningful. Henry considered the offer carefully. He'd spent years cooking for people who cared more about status than flavor. The idea of working in a neighborhood restaurant, creating good food for regular customers, appealed to him. He agreed to try it for a month. The partnership changed Sherwood's Kitchen. Henry brought professional techniques and refined recipes, while Robin's team contributed their knowledge of what customers wanted and could afford. Together, they created a menu that offered restaurant-quality food at neighborhood prices. The change wasn't just about the food. Henry taught them about presentation, showing how the same ingredients could look completely different with proper plating. He demonstrated knife skills that cut prep time in half, explained flavor combinations that made simple ingredients taste complex, and shared shortcuts that professional kitchens used to serve hundreds of customers without sacrificing quality. Little John learned advanced cooking methods that elevated his already considerable skills. He discovered that timing was everything in a professional kitchen, that prep work done properly could make service run smoothly, and that tasting food throughout the cooking process was the difference between good meals and great ones. Will discovered that serving great food was even more satisfying than serving adequate food. Customers lingered longer, tipped better, and most importantly, they left happier. He learned to describe dishes in ways that made them sound appealing, to suggest wine pairings that enhanced the dining experience, and to handle complaints with grace and professionalism. Tuck found that customers lingered longer when the food was special, giving him more opportunities to share his stories and jokes. He also learned that good ingredients didn't have to be expensive ingredients, that proper storage could extend the life of fresh produce, and that a well-organized kitchen was a happy kitchen. Maid Marian noticed the changes immediately. She started coming in more often, sometimes bringing colleagues from the bank. Word spread through the neighborhood that something special was happening at Sherwood's Kitchen. The restaurant began attracting customers from other parts of the city. Sheriff Norton returned for another inspection, clearly hoping to find problems caused by the increased business. Instead, he found a kitchen operating at an even higher standard than before. Henry had implemented professional systems and training that exceeded health department requirements. The inspector's anger was obvious. He'd expected to find problems that would justify shutting down the restaurant. Instead, he found a model operation that other restaurants could learn from. Norton left with a clean inspection report and a scowl that suggested he'd be back. Business continued to grow as word spread about the food at Sherwood's Kitchen. Food bloggers started writing reviews, customers posted photos on social media, and local newspapers ran features about the neighborhood restaurant that was serving upscale cuisine at reasonable prices. The attention brought new challenges. Customers who'd never set foot in the neighborhood before started showing up, expecting the same level of service they'd get at expensive restaurants. Some were disappointed by the simple decor and casual atmosphere. Others were pleasantly surprised to find genuine hospitality and food that tasted better than places that charged 3 times as much. Robin had to learn to manage success carefully. He hired additional staff, including a part-time dishwasher and a weekend server. He upgraded some equipment, but kept the basic character of the restaurant intact. Most importantly, he made sure that regular customers still felt welcome and valued, even as new faces filled the dining room. The growth also brought financial benefits. For the first time since opening, Robin was able to pay himself a decent wage. He set aside money for equipment repairs, started a small emergency fund, and even began thinking about expanding the restaurant's hours. Success felt good, but it also felt fragile, like something that could disappear if he wasn't careful. Robin watched the success with mixed feelings. He was proud of what they'd accomplished, but he worried about losing the community atmosphere that had made the restaurant special. Success could be as dangerous as failure if it changed what made a place unique. Henry suggested they expand gradually, improving quality rather than increasing size. The goal wasn't to become another fancy restaurant, but to prove that good food could be accessible to everyone. They could set an example for other small restaurants to follow. The solution came from an unexpected source. The mayor's redevelopment plan had stalled due to community opposition and budget concerns. The neighborhood would remain affordable, at least for now. Small businesses like Sherwood's Kitchen would survive to continue serving their communities. The victory felt bittersweet. Robin was relieved that his restaurant would survive, but he understood that the fight wasn't over. Developers would return with new plans, rent would eventually increase, and the neighborhood would continue to change. The key was building something strong enough to weather those changes. Robin began thinking about the restaurant's long-term future. He considered opening a second location, maybe in another neighborhood that needed good affordable food. He thought about franchising the concept, teaching other people how to run community-focused restaurants. Most importantly, he wanted to prove that success didn't require abandoning the values that had made Sherwood's Kitchen special in the first place. Robin realized he'd learned something important about leadership. It wasn't about taking from the rich to give to the poor. It was about creating opportunities for everyone to have access to good things. In his case, that meant serving excellent food at prices regular people could afford. The restaurant had become more than just a place to eat. It was a community gathering spot where people from different backgrounds could share meals and conversation. Bank workers sat next to construction crews, retired teachers talked with young families, and everyone felt welcome. As the sun set on another successful day, Robin stood behind the counter and watched his customers enjoy their meals. Little John was teaching a new cook the techniques he'd learned from Henry. Will was making an elderly customer laugh with one of his stories. Tuck was sharing cooking tips with a young mother who wanted to improve her family's meals. Maid Marian lingered after finishing her dinner, and Robin finally worked up the courage to ask if she'd like to see the kitchen. She accepted the invitation, and they spent an hour talking about food, business, and the changes in the neighborhood. Robin discovered that she was more interested in the restaurant's mission than in the food itself. The evening ended with the whole crew working together to clean and prepare for the next day. They'd found something special in their little restaurant, something that went beyond profit and loss statements. They'd created a place where good food brought people together, where everyone could afford to eat well, and where hard work was rewarded with satisfaction. Robin looked around at his team and his restaurant, thinking about how far they'd come. They'd started as a struggling neighborhood kitchen serving simple food to regular customers. Now they were still serving regular customers, but the food was extraordinary and the atmosphere was magical. The legend of Robin Hood had always been about more than stealing from the rich. It was about creating justice in an unfair world, about making sure everyone had access to what they needed to live well. In his small way, Robin had done exactly that. He'd taken the knowledge and resources that were being wasted by the wealthy and used them to serve his community. As he turned off the lights and locked the door, Robin smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new customers, and new opportunities to serve good food to people who appreciated it. Sheriff Norton would probably return with more inspections, business would continue to grow, and the neighborhood would keep changing. But tonight, Robin was content. He'd built something worth protecting, something that made his corner of the world a little better. The restaurant was clean, the refrigerators were full, and his team was ready for whatever came next. In the end, that was enough. The story of Robin Hood's restaurant was still being written, one meal at a time.